The inspiration that Chief John Bigtree brought amongst the indigenous culture through his film. Chief John Bigtree is one of Hollywood's most inspirational and least appreciated actors of his time. He persevered through the role as the lowly Indian chief/scout through the early 1900s. Chief John Bigtree was born June 2nd, 1877, with the name Isaac Johnny John in Michigan, United States. He started his career with 10 silent films consisting of The Spirit of 76, 1917, A Fight for Love, 1919, and The Avenging Arrow, 1921. Unfortunately, all of these films are lost. Chief John Bigtree had a very slow start in Hollywood, having to endure over 10 years of acting professionally to land his first good role in a Hollywood film. He was given the stage name Chief John Bigtree in the late 1920s and would use this name for the rest of his life. As Chief John Bigtree progressed through his acting career, he finally was able to play bigger roles like an Indian scout and chief of his tribe. In the late 1920s, John Ford used Chief John Bigtree in one of his films and selected him for several other Hollywood westerns over a span of 33 years. He had been in 59 films, with 5 of these films being under the production of John Ford. Although Chief John Bigtree sought to play authentic roles, he was often pressured to take on roles that made him look bad in his films. But Chief John Bigtree never spoke up as an actor because of the need to take care of his family. His parents died when he was just starting his film career, and he had to find a way to support his wife, Clara, and his son, Bertie. Chief John Bigtree was not a very avid talker when it came to being off stage, and he had rarely made comments towards the media during his acting career because the media never truly paid attention to him. Although many indigenous actors and actresses spoke out about being falsely portrayed, Chief Bigtree was not one to speak out. The fact that there is very little information on Chief Bigtree is a reflection of how underappreciated he was. In one of Chief John Bigtree's key films, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon in 1949, he portrayed Chief Pony That Walks, a Navajo First Nation Indian. He played a sarcastic chief who took very little seriously, and he had since been known as a sarcastic actor in Hollywood's film industry. This was Chief Bigtree's biggest role of his career, acting as the lead chief, which had given him some recognition that he finally deserved. During one of his biggest moments, he focused on something that has negatively impacted the role of indigenous actors: alcohol and tobacco. His most known line in any movie is when he told Captain Birtles, John Wayne, to come with him and get drunk to avoid war. His role as chief was short-lived, as he only made 8 minutes of screen time in a movie that was over an hour and 45 minutes long. The fact that his biggest role had a screen time of 8 minutes has summed up the life of an indigenous actor in the majority of the 1900s. For Chief Bigtree's 33-year acting career, he was only ever credited in 12 films. His character in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon reminded me of the film Hostiles, as he is a very stoic character, just like Chief Yellowhawk, who was Wes Study's character, and displayed some humor in his lines. However, there was a little bit of a difference between them, as Chief John Bigtree had only 8 minutes of screen time, but still managed to have some influential effect. We can all learn from one of the first ever indigenous actors to make it on the film industry, but I shouldn't have to celebrate his career for the screen time he was given. I should be giving him celebration for the screen time he was able to give other indigenous actors because of the impact he had on them. He not only gave them opportunities in the future, but he gave the indigenous film community hope to successfully and finally have true, authentic indigenous voice. Chief John Bigtree also gave indigenous directors a chance to keep pushing in search of true authenticity and the ability to use their voice when it mattered most. Unfortunately, he passed away in July 6, 1967 on the Onondaga Indian Reserve, where he had lived with his wife and son. Many indigenous actors nowadays look up to Chief John Bigtree when it comes to influence. Although we don't see it, we can understand why they look up to him, because historically, when his culture was treated inferior to other cultures, he was still able to thrive with a positive mindset. I believe his portrayal of Chief Pony That Walks in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon was in fact the only film in which he was able to express his true character. I believe his character in this film can help us connect to bigger news issues like the Wounded Knee battle in 1973, which had the indigenous community retaliate against the police forces, or even recent news stories like the pipeline being built out west in BC. These recent news stories have shaped modern-day society in ways that have never been seen before, and it is because of the inspiration that he gave to Northern American indigenous groups. The fact that the modern-day film industry looks up to Chief John Bigtree meant that their appreciation for him has increased throughout the years. Indigenous communities have produced incredible actors and actresses across the continent, and much of Hollywood's audience still to this day will not truly understand the impact that early Indigenous acting had on modern-day Hollywood. But we do in fact see the growth in authenticity through the years of Hollywood filmmaking, and the attempt at giving Indigenous acting more screen time and awareness. It is also for these reasons that I believe 100% of Chief John Bigtree's films fall under Unit 4, Representation and Reconciliation with a focus on Indigenous voice. It is for this exact reason that Chief John Bigtree is one of the most influential actors in Hollywood Western history. Fun facts: Chief John Bigtree was born with the name Isaac Johnny John. Out of the 59 films, he was only credited in 12 of them, and he's presented on the Indian head nickel that was crafted by James Earl Fraser. And last but not least, Chief John Bigtree died on July 6, 1967 in Buffalo, New York due to cancer.